Chapter 7 Government Actions in Markets. 7.1 Price Ceilings. Controversy sometimes surrounds the price and quantities established by demand and supply, especially for products that are considered necessities. In some cases, discontent over prices turns into public pressure on politicians, who may then pass legislation to prevent a certain price from climbing too high or falling too low. The government imposes price controls to solve a problem perceived to be created by the market price. When prices are established by a free market, then there is a balance between supply and demand. The quantity supplied at the market price equals the quantity demanded at that price. So the government imposition of price controls causes either excess supply or excess demand, since the legal price often differs greatly from the market price. Price controls. Laws that government enact to regulate prices are called price controls. Price controls come into two flavors. A price ceiling keeps a price from rising above a certain level, the ceiling, while a price floor keeps a price from falling below a given level, the floor. We look at inefficiency that is created when the government imposes a rent ceiling on the housing market, a minimum wage in the labor market, and a price support in an agricultural market. Price ceiling. A price ceiling is a legal maximum price that one pays for some good or service. A government imposes price ceilings in order to keep the price of some necessary good or service affordable. Trading at a high price is illegal. For example, in 2005 during Hurricane Katrina, the price of bottled water increased above $5 per gallon. As a result, many people called for price controls on bottled water to prevent the price from rising so high. Rent controls is one example of price ceiling. Rent control become a politically hot topic when rents begin to rise rapidly. In some cities, such as Albany, renters have pressed political leaders to pass rent control laws, a price ceiling that usually works by stating that landlords cannot raise rents by only a certain maximum percentage each year. Some of the best examples of rent control occur in urban areas such as New York, Washington, D.C., or San Francisco. Rent ceiling creates a shortage. Figure illustrates the original equilibrium EO lies in the intersection of supply curve SO and the demand curve DO, corresponding to an equilibrium price of $500 and equilibrium quantity of 15,000 units of rental housing. The effect of greater income or a change in taste is to shift the demand curve for rental housing to the right from DO to D1 on the graph. In this market, at the new equilibrium E1, the price of the rental unit would rise to $600 and the equilibrium quantity would increase to 17,000 units. Suppose that a city government passes a rent control law to keep the price of the original equilibrium of $500 for a typical apartment. In figure, the horizontal line at the price of $500 shows the legally fixed maximum price set by the rent control law. At that price $500, the quantity supplied remains at the same 15,000 rental units, but the quantity demanded is 19,000 rental units. In other words, the quantity demanded exceeds the quantity supplied, so there is a shortage of rental housing. Price ceilings are enacted in an attempt to keep prices low for those who need the product. However, when the market price is not allowed to rise to the equilibrium level, the quantity demanded exceeds quantity supplied and thus a shortage occurs. Those who manage to purchase a product at a lower price given by the price ceiling will benefit, but sellers of the product will suffer, along with those who are not able to purchase the product at all. Quality is also likely to deteriorate. The 15,000 units of housing that owners are willing to make available must somehow be allocated among people who are seeking 19,000 units. This allocation might be achieved in two ways: a black market, increased search activity. A black market is an illegal market that operates alongside a government-regulated market. A rent ceiling sometimes creates a black market in housing as frustrated renters and landlords try to find ways of raising the rent above the legally imposed ceiling. Landlords want higher rents because they know that renters are willing to pay more for the existing quantity of housing. Renters are willing to pay more to jump to the front of the line. The rent for housing in the black market is somewhere between the ceiling rent and the maximum rent a tenant is willing to pay. Increased search activity. The time spent looking for someone with whom to do business is called search activity. We spend some time in search activity almost every time we buy something, and especially when we buy big items such as a car or a home. When a price ceiling creates a shortage of housing, search activity increases. In a rent-controlled housing market, frustrated would be renters scan the newspaper, keen apartment seekers race to be the first on the scene when news of a possible apartment breaks. The opportunity cost of a good is equal to its price plus the value of the search time spent finding the good. Search activity is costly. It uses time and other resources such as telephones, automobiles, and gasoline that could have been used in other productive ways. In the figure, with a rent ceiling of $400 a month, 3,000 units of housing are available. Someone is willing to pay $625 a month for the 3,000th unit of housing. Black market rent might be as high as $625 a month, or search activity might be equivalent to adding $225 a month to the rent ceiling. Inefficiency of rent ceiling. In a housing market with no rent ceiling, the market forces determine the equilibrium rent. The quantity of housing demanded equals the quantity of housing supply. In this situation, scarce housing resources are allocated efficiently because the marginal cost of housing equals the marginal benefit. Figure 1 shows this efficient outcome in the Biloxi apartment rental market. In this efficient market, total surplus, the sum of consumer surplus, the green area, and the producer surplus, the blue area, is maximized with the equilibrium rent and the quantity of housing. Figure shows that with a rent ceiling, the outcome is inefficient. Marginal benefit exceeds marginal cost, producer surplus and consumer surplus shrink, deadweight loss, the gray area arises, resources are lost in search activities and evading the rent ceiling law. This loss is borne by the people who can't find housing and by landlords who can't afford housing at the lower rent ceiling. But the total loss exceeds the deadweight loss. Resources get used in costly search activity or in evading the law in the black market. The value of these resources might be as large as the red rectangle. There is yet a further loss, the cost of enforcing the rent ceiling law. This loss, which is borne by taxpayers, is not visible in the figure. The size of the loss from a rent ceiling depends on the elasticity of supply and demand. If supply is inelastic, a rent ceiling brings a small decrease in the quantity of housing supplied. And demand is inelastic, a rent ceiling brings a small increase in the quantity of housing demanded. So the more inelastic the supply or the demand, the smaller is the shortage of housing and the smaller is the deadweight loss. Thus, in rent control over the short run, the supply of apartments is inelastic since the quantity of building already supplied is constant and those being constructed will be constructed because of sunk costs. Over the long run, however, rent control decreases the availability of apartments since suppliers do not wish to spend money to build more apartments when they cannot charge a profitable rent. Landlords not only do not build any more apartments, but they do not maintain the ones they have, not only to save cost, but also because they do not have to worry about market demand. Since there is excessive demand for rent-controlled apartments, hence excess demand and limited supply leads to a large shortage and poor maintenance of quality. In short, those on the outside cannot get a property while those on the inside have to endure poorer quality residences. Chapter Review. A price ceiling is a cap or a limit on the amount producers and charge the consumers for their goods and services. Generally speaking, ceilings intend on making it cheaper for consumers to participate in the market and is implemented to ensure everyone has an affordable place to live and rent. Price ceilings may potentially lead to excess demand in the market as it is left in disequilibrium. Price ceilings are bad because they artificially create shortages as part of supply and demand. When demand increases, prices increase to attract a higher level of production by suppliers. However, when prices are set artificially below the equilibrium point, prices are low, demand is high, and producers are unable to meet supply. A black market for housing exists because of the rent ceiling. The rent for housing in the black market is somewhere between the ceiling rent and the maximum rent a tenant is willing to pay.